Did you know that the Men in Black movies were based on a real-life story? Not just a story, but a clandestine government department tasked with investigating and covering up some of the nation's most potentially destructive secrets. Thanks to a recently declassified CIA report and a number of conflicting pieces of information coming out of the Pentagon, the media has finally caught on to the shady antics happening behind closed doors. What do the Men in Black do? How has their role been swept under the radar for so long? And what does it all have to do with the final frontier? Let's dive into the story and see what we can uncover once and for all. According to a report published by the CIA, the United States Air Force made quote-unquote misleading and deceptive statements to the public in order to allay public fears and to protect an extraordinary sensitive national security project. It's a vague and intriguing statement that points to one giant clandestine operation, one which has been kept out of the public eye for decades. What does it all mean? What is the CIA alluding to? Before we uncover the details and shed light on one of the nation's most shadowed secrets, we want you to look at this video. Even though we're sure some or most of you have already seen it, we have far more answers now compared to when it first surfaced. These figures are examples of what movie fans, conspiracy theorists, and governments refer to as the Men in Black, although governments keep them as discreet as possible. We've all seen the blockbuster films starring Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, right? If you haven't, here's the lowdown. The films portray the Men in Black to be a secret agency that polices aliens, protects Earth from extraterrestrial threats, and uses memory-erasing neuralizers to keep alien activity a secret. It sounds fictional. It sounds exactly like something you'd see in the fantasy world of Tinseltown. But surprisingly and spookingly, these films are actually based on an alleged reality. Not too long ago, the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, or DoD for short, confirmed who these men are and what they were doing. As it turns out, there's a lot more to the story than we first realized. There is far more meaning to these eerie, black coat-wearing, black hat-donning agents. The DoD confirmed the involvement of the Men in Black, which leads us to believe that the long list of peculiar sightings, those which detail strange otherworldly interactions over the recent decades, do indeed have merit. Let's take a look at some of those encounters. In 1968, Jack Robinson of New Jersey had a very odd experience. Jack was a UFO enthusiast and researcher, and he and his wife had been terrorized by a man in black who was standing across the street from their apartment building. The couple made reports that their apartment had been rummaged through, which only inflated suspicions that a government agent was positioned to threaten and intimidate them in order to keep quiet. But keep quiet about what? Had Jack uncovered something he shouldn't have? After the man in black had watched from the street for 3 consecutive days, their friend, Timothy Green Beckley, snapped a photo. This was that photo. This wasn't the only act of a suspicious man in black keeping watch. The first ever recorded Men in Black experience occurred in June of 1947, when Harold Dahl was out on his boat in the Puget Sound. He claimed that he saw 6 circular objects in the sky, flying saucer-like objects, one of which crumbled and fell into the water below, throwing debris all around, injuring Harold's son, and fatally landing on his dog. He allegedly had photo evidence to prove it, but was approached later by a man in black who altered the photos and forbade him to speak of the incident. There are plenty more chapters to this story. Robert Richardson's Men in Black experience in Ohio in 1967. Dr. Herbert Hopkins' intimidating anecdote of objects dematerializing in Maine in September of 1976. And the list goes on. In 2002, though, a name that we can all relate to came face to face with his very own black-suited watchman, famous actor Dan Aykroyd. At the time, he had just sold the rights to his alien-themed TV show called Out There to the Sci-Fi Network. Its content was powerful enough to raise serious questions amongst the extraterrestrial enthusiast and conspiracist communities. While he was taking a break from an interview about the show, he stepped outside for a moment of peace. As Dan recounts, suddenly, as if out of thin air, a black Ford sedan appeared across the street. A large man stepped out of the car and made glaring eye contact with him. After Dan took a brief moment to avert his gaze, once he had looked back across the street, the car and the man were gone. Just 2 hours after the encounter, Aykroyd put out this public message, quote, "We were told not to continue taping, and the show was canceled." With good reason, eyebrows were raised after this so-called coincidental moment. But if these Dan Aykroyd and Jack Robinson type of encounters have been happening since the early 1940s, why is the issue only resurfacing now? Why has it been allowed to be swept under the rug for so long? Back in 2017, declassified reports emerged that the US Navy had been encountering UFOs, or as they've recently referred to them as UAPs, short for unexplained aerial phenomena. While the Navy has been more than willing to admit their sightings, the United States Air Force, on the other hand, has not. The Air Force has remained remarkably quiet when it comes to mysterious objects that might be flying around in the skies. And as it turns out, they have a reason to be quiet. That reason is Project Blue Book. This little-known operation, which spanned over 22 years from 1947 to 1969, was the only official program ever set up by the US government and military to try to understand the phenomena that was the UFO. Note, the only official program. If the Men in Black program really does have merit, then there's every chance that more multi-million-dollar clandestine operations are underway in the shadows. Project Blue Book was long assumed to be a treasure trove of UFO secrets and analytics. However, its data was shrouded in secrecy. Even following the declassification of the documents, they remained on microfilm in the National Archive in Washington, D.C., unbeknownst to the general public and difficult to access. But then, in 2015, John Greenwald Jr. changed that story. John is the creator of the Black Vault database, a website created to give the public access to government secrets. He acquired the Blue Book data and uploaded close to 130,000 pages of intriguing files onto a massive, searchable database. From that point onwards, Blue Book was out there for the world to see and judge. These documents revealed that during Blue Book's operation, the U.S. Air Force gathered information on 12,618 UFO sightings from coast to coast. To pepper more mystery on top of it all, in December of 1953, a joint piece of regulation between the Army, Navy, and Air Force, known as Regulation Number 146, declared it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons. Violators would face 2 years behind bars and $10,000 in fines. These days, the U.S. Air Force has a budget of approximately $165.6 billion, with an average employee salary of just over $61,000 per year. While those are both significantly higher numbers than 60 years ago in the height of Project Blue Book, it allows us to assume the financial scope of this clandestine operation. Even if just 10 agents were part of the team, that's $13.4 million in salary costs alone over the 22-year period. Throw equipment into the mix and that number only grows. All signs point toward the AFOSI as the home base for Project Blue Book. It stands for Air Force Office of Special Investigations, a military branch responsible for independent criminal investigative, counterintelligence, and protective service operations that functions outside of the traditional military chain of command. The notoriety of the AFOSI has simmered and flattened as the 20th century came to an end, but when the Navy released these videos, then the Air Force Office of Special Investigations' name suddenly returned to the spotlight, sparking droves of questions. If these videos were captured by the Navy, then why was the AFOSI mentioned? It suggests that there may well be more to the story than we're being told. The Pentagon has also contradicted themselves on more than one occasion. Emails tied to the Department of Defense suggest that this video footage belonged to the Navy, and that the Navy was listed solely as the, quote, original classification authority. But according to Susan Goff, a spokesperson for the Secretary of Defense's Office of Public Affairs, quote, the investigation determined the videos were not classified, end quote. With a discretionary budget of almost $690 billion, you would think that they'd be able to afford to keep their stories straight. A list of other departments have found themselves involved with this secret footage debacle as well. The $22 billion Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, for one, the Air Force and Navy, evidently, and also the CIA, which has an annual budget of over $15 billion itself dispersed throughout a number of investigations, some of which intrinsically tie in with the Men in Black. It was actually one very specific CIA report that opened this Men in Black-related Pandora's box. This report, published in 1997, states the following thought-provoking points. Fact 1. CIA officials knew that the British and the Canadians were already experimenting with flying saucers. Those flying saucers fell under the umbrella of the so-called Project Y. Meanwhile, it was thought that the Soviets were conducting similar trials of their own. Fact 2. A flying saucer sighting by U.S. Senator Richard Russell and his party while traveling on a train in the USSR in October 1955. And fact 3. On October 7, 1966, the University of Colorado accepted a $325,000 contract with the Air Force for an 18-month study of flying saucers. Most of these facts are only recently emerging into the public sphere. For decades, all of the focus on aliens, UFOs, UAPs, and potentially secret experiments have led back to, for the most part, a single hideout, Area 51, the highly classified remote detachment of the Edwards Air Force Base. Discrete flight tests of spy planes and experimental aircraft began at Area 51 in 1955 under a $22 million program. That's over $200 million in today's value. Ever since then, suspicions have been high. Could the truth buried here be what the Men in Black are trying to keep under wraps from the general public? People who are familiar with the Roswell, New Mexico balloon crash of 1947 would likely think so. As we fast forward to modern times, space exploration and the concept of out-of-this-world entities is more fascinating, more realistic, and more intense than ever. Elon Musk's $36 billion SpaceX is taking the lead as we investigate what's really out there. In late May of 2020, SpaceX successfully launched 2 astronauts to the International Space Station using its reusable Falcon 9 rocket. It's taking the final frontier out of the grasp of traditional government agencies like NASA and putting it into the hands of public companies and individuals. Will this mean that more answers are soon to be revealed? If the promised space-based global internet network Starlink successfully rolls out, which could be valued at over $30 billion by 2025, then the answer to that question could very well be yes. So, since it's now well established that the government is prone to cover-ups, could there be more to this story? Does the uncertainty proposed by Project Blue Book, the contradictory nature of the Pentagon statements, and the accounts and footage of the Men in Black point to something else? Could the recently leaked Navy footage simply be an advanced, top-secret, man-made spacecraft, or something else entirely? As companies like SpaceX close the gap, we'll hopefully find out in the years to come. What's your take on all this? What are they really hiding? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and as always, thanks so much for checking out The Richest. See you next time and have a great day.